Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the NY Deterrence Center. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowtham, co-founder and vice president for research at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. The NY Deterrence Center is a 501c3 organization ensuring a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrence and its ongoing modernization. Thank you for listening and welcome to the show. The views of the host and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another exciting episode of NucleCast. Of course, I am your host, as always, Adam Lowther. And today we have two great guests, Dr. Ernest Gunasekara-Rockwell and Dr. Laura Thurston-Goodrow. Now, Ernest and Laura are, of course, friends and colleagues of mine that I wanted to have on NucleCast because it's a topic that we don't often talk about. And that, of course, is the importance of professional writing. And so Ernest is the editor of the Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs, and Laura is the editor of what formerly was Strategic Studies Quarterly. So for those of you that have been around the Air Force for a long time, and it is now Ether, and it made some changes to refocus on more air power and Air Force specific strategic issues. And then don't you also edit ASOR as well? Do you have both of them, Air and Space Operations Review? And so these are sort of three important publications for the Air Force in its professional writing and professional publishing. So thanks for joining us on NucleCast. So I wanted to have you guys on. Our audience, our listening audience tends to be senior folks across the nuclear enterprise. And we oftentimes talk with general officers and lab directors, and we talk about contemporary issues going on across the nuclear enterprise. But one of the things that I think is oftentimes undervalued is our ability as a enterprise to effectively write and capture what's happening and capture it for longevity, beyond, perhaps a speech we gave to a group or a presentation at a meeting, because it's, we have a sense of our history and a sense of what works and what doesn't through much of the Air Force's professional writing. And then we also are able to create lessons learned and to understand the past and to make better decisions about the future through that writing. So for you guys, this is at least my reading of why we do what we do and why publishing is so important. So Laura, why don't you kick us off? As you think about the two journals, one's ASOR, sort of an operationally focused journal, and Ether is the more strategic. What is it that you're hoping to get out of these journals? And, what sort of request would you have for the community, the air power community, the nuclear community, in encouraging them to write for you and contribute?
So thanks. I think from a really, 35,000 foot, as they say, view, I think one of the key roles that our journals play for Air University Press, and I was at Parameters before, the military journals, they play they kind of help the military bridge that gap into civilian academe. And I think that's a very specific role of the military journals, because we're not public affairs. I mean, from the start, I think there's a very widespread misconception, even among senior active duty officers, that what Air University Press, for example, does is just, we just publish, books that general officers want to write, and that somehow, we only say the party line, or we only allow the party line. And it's just not true. In our charter, it's very clear that we have academic freedom. So that's one of my main messages I want to get out. I think there's that aspect of it. And then the journals, like I said before, they kind of bridge a really interesting gap between civilian and military academia. So PME, and then once someone goes and gets a higher degree, and then they come back and they're writing, maybe they're still active duty, but they have a PhD, or they're writing about something, and then that space, the journal space, operates as like a common ground for them to have a higher level conversation about policy or about operations with civilian academics who also study. In a Western society, the military is not a separate part. We're all together. And so my view is that the journals function as kind of a meeting place for those two voices.
Yeah, that's it's one of the things I like, about the military's professional journals is that they offer sort of a unique space to write in, a peer-reviewed place that looks, traditional military or traditional civilian academic journals, they're highly theoretical. It's, the methodology is the primary focus, but you don't get a lot of the application of whatever, these theories, whereas professional military journals apply it and analyze it in a empirical way, and they do that in a very useful way that I think communicates to civilian academics, we tried your theory, and then here's the result. And so to me, it sort of meets a niche that isn't met anywhere else. Now, with the Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs, your charter, you have sort of a similar charter as a military journal, but you're also different. Can you explain for us, sort of what those differences are and what you're hoping to achieve?
Yeah, sure. We're kind of a niche, obviously, but we try to paint our picture on a larger canvas because we're reaching out to our friends and allies throughout the Indo-Pacific writ large. Obviously, from the west coast of the Americas all the way to the east coast of Africa and Antarctica up to the Arctic. So we're dealing with a pretty diverse range of readership, but also in terms of our authors. We try to get diplomats and high-ranking military professionals from throughout the region to contribute to our publication, and all of us do that to some extent. But that's really our thing from the get-go. And what we try to do is a little bit of alchemy, if you will. We try to take the best from the ivory tower, the best from the military silos, and mix them into this concoction, and it comes out as gold when we put it out there in print, and then has some value then for all of the different communities that are contributing and consuming our publication. And at the end of the day, we're trying to drive the narrative, but we're also trying to push the envelope in prescribing policy for decision makers, both those in uniform and those in suits and dresses throughout the Indo-Pacific, right? And like Laura said, we're not pushing a party line. Truth be told, I'm obviously not very keen on the regime in Beijing, and I dare say that there is some editorial voice that creeps through in that regard. But we do try to be a medium for intellectual discussion that brings together theorists and operators into a conversation that has purpose, and not just hey, look at my name in print. Isn't that great? At the end of the day, we want it to mean something, and to mean something for all of the communities that are being a part of this endeavor.
So as you look sort of at military publishing, for some of the military presses, the last handful of years is, I remember what was it, RMD 706? Was that, or whenever we had the sequestration, what was it called? I'm drawing a blank now. Sequestration, 10 years ago. And we took cuts everywhere. And, the military presses that, are responsible for the professional journals, they took their cuts as well. And, the years have been lean because there's always this sort of this debate between education and operations. And, should we focus all the money on operations, or should we have some for education? It's a timeless debate and question that I don't think we're going to solve. But I wonder, if you were to make the case for why professional journals, for each of the services, for the joint staff, for, NDU, there's professional journals throughout, why they're important. And, you had that chance to stand before, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Air Force Chief of Staff, whomever it might be. What would be your argument? And for the listeners, what would be your argument as to why they should consistently read those journals? Laura, do you want to go ahead and take that question first?
Sure.
Although the next question, Ernest, you're going to get the next one first.
Well, sort of in brief, again, I go back to that conversation that I think is critical between our civilian society and our military society. And I think there's a strong history in Western militaries. The UK is one, for example, where having an educated officer corps, and now it's expanding to the enlisted corps, having an educated military force has benefit in a Western society, because you want people to think. You want people to be critical thinkers. And I hear all the time from PME, enlisted PME leaders and faculty who say, how do I get, our younger military airmen or guardians into publishing? How do we get them engaged? Because it's really important that they're part of this conversation and they're thinking at those higher levels. So I would say that fundamentally, it's not a program office, it's not flashy, but we come very reasonably priced now. So, and then in terms of, you asked why it would be important for people to read. I think just because it broadens your view. It doesn't, if you're reading about a particular topic and it has to do with foreign policy or security affairs at any level, if you're only reading a civilian journal and you're not getting the military perspective, I think you're not getting the full weight of that. Or, you can a lot of think tank people are former military or have been in PME or have been connected with the military, but not everyone. And, that voice is important. And actually, I was just on I did my own podcast a couple hours ago, and the individual that I spoke with, who is now a colonel, he was in his PhD program, I think, master's or PhD program, and they were having a classroom discussion about the platform that he worked on, and they didn't want to hear what he had to say about it. And he said they were telling him, this is what this does. And he said, no, I've actually flown it, so I actually know what it does. But they didn't want to hear that. And so I think, again, and then from a broader perspective, you just open the door to more civilian military conversations, which, again, looking at our recruiting numbers, is just so important right now.
Yeah, you're right about us. You've taken hits over the course of the last decade or so. I when I first moved away from strictly editing and into administration a little bit, just before I became managing editor, one of the first things I had to do was write a white paper on why a university press. To me it was a no-brainer, but obviously, and that's something that we've had to do. It seems like every 5 to 10 years with the press, is make the case for why we exist, and so it's the same conversation we're having right now, right? Laura's articulated it quite well. We don't want dummies making decisions. I mean, it's pretty much that simple, right? And so how do you do that? You educate them, and we are the medium through which that's done outside of the classroom. Otherwise, you end up being an echo chamber where you've got a bunch of retired folks that are in the classroom teaching the next generation of folks that are still in uniform, and they don't hear anything from alternative perspectives. And I think that's where we come in, and we offer, places for officers to write, some of who may be instructors, some of who may not be, some of whom, if they're quite articulate, might actually still be students. And then, of course, we bring in the other voices from academia and from, diplomats and whatnot. And so they get a very holistic, whole of government sort of picture of the topics that they're discussing, instead of what might be a much more limited perspective in the classroom. And so I see us as co-curricular in terms of PME. And then, the cross current is that, like Laura said, folks that are learning out in the civilian world get a feel for, what the perspective is from the operator's perspective, and get a little bit more grounding away from the ivory tower fluff that is sometimes out there.
Yeah, it's as I've thought about it, I like peer review writing because it really makes you think through arguments. And so too often, I'll see a PowerPoint or somebody will talk, but they've not really in detail thought through the ideas very clearly or carefully. But when you actually get, an article that's peer reviewed published, you've had to really carefully think through ideas, and you've had to hone those ideas, and they've been vetted. And I think that's a good thing. That's good for everybody. And it helps you offer. Yeah. But I'll tell you, I had an experience whenever, I was at Air University, and I was in Changsha, China, at National University of Defense Technology for a meeting between the PLA, and I was there representing the U.S. Air Force. And a PLA general came up to me, and this was when Air and Space ASPJ was in Chinese, and the general said, he said, "Adam, we read your journal." And then he went on and he said, "We think we can beat your technology, but I don't think we can match your officers. Your officers think better than ours." And it was because he had been reading ASPJ in his native language, in Chinese, and he thought, "Wow, these American airmen, they're a really thoughtful, sort of introspective group because of the kinds of writing that they were engaged in." And he didn't see that in his own officer corps. And so I thought that was one of those really important efforts where, an Air Force professional journal had some, significant thought given to it by an adversary. We were just competitors back then, but now, and so it does do quite a lot to engage our allies, adversaries, and and I think it helps to demonstrate the quality of our officer corps, which I think is one of those things that's really important for us to do, in writ large. Now, it is that time in the show where I have to take a quick break, so we'll do that. And when we get back, I want to toss the question to you first, Ernest, and that question, it's kind of a simple one. Could you lay out for the listeners sort of what are your areas of interest? What kind of articles are you looking for? And if you were, if our listeners were to say, "Hey, I might want to write for, Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs, ASOR, Ether," what would they want to write for you, and which would be the right journal to target? So you're listening to NucleCast, and we'll be right back. This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the ANWA Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. And we're back, and we're talking to Ernest and Laura, the editors of the Air Force's professional journals, about writing. So, Ernest, what are the areas of interest that you have from prospective authors?
Good Lord, we have a wide array of different topics. In fact, every year I put together what I think are the top 25 that we should be looking at, and then I send it over to the Commander's Action Group over at Pacific Air Forces and let them whittle it down a little bit so that I know what they want me to focus on. While we're not PA, obviously, we do want to publish material that's of relevance to the combatant command in our region. And so we do have the commander of Pacific Air Forces and now the commander of Indo-Pacific Space Force. They're both on our editorial board. And so they help me kind of narrow that down a bit as to what we're focusing on. We do some deep dives into particular countries. We just published an issue on Thailand with a lot of emphasis on military reform or lack thereof. The backsliding of democracy and that sort of thing. But we do a lot of other things that are, much more air power, space power focused as well. We did an issue this last year on Space Force. We had General Armano. She gave us a piece on, the history of standing up Space Force and her role in being a part of that. And then General Mastelier provided a piece as to what the new combatant command would do for helping out Indo-PACOM with their space-related sorts of activities in the region. And so, and at the same time, we've got pieces that are that people wouldn't typically think of, medical logistics in the Indo-Pacific, for example, and the fact that we don't have enough fresh blood supply in Korea if that war were to go hot over there. And so in the coming year, we're looking at an issue dealing with environmental security. We're looking at another one that's focused on Australia and its growing role in the Indo-Pacific writ large, and through AUKUS, through Quad, and just through the fact that it's kind of a emerging middle power in the region that has the potential to be perhaps even more. We're trying to put together an issue on Sri Lanka. My team's been over there a couple of times in the last year. We met with the chief of the Air Force there and had hoped to bring home a fully blown Sri Lankan issue, and it didn't happen. But we're still hopeful that we'll get it one out in this coming year. We do a lot of stuff that's quite disparate. So you've got everything from operational stuff to grand strategy to foreign policy to logistics, and so chances are if you're doing something that's tied to the Indo-Pacific and somebody in the military would be interested in it or somebody in government would be interested in it, we probably have an issue that would be suited for it. We do a lot of general issues as well, so that we can kind of gather those pieces that fall outside of these more thematic issues that I've been talking about. And so we put those out every once in a while too, so that we can grab the good stuff that comes our way that doesn't fit those themes. So a lot of different topics.
And how about you, Laura?
Well, to echo Ernest, he says it well. It's interesting because there is such a broad range. That's actually a challenge for me when it comes to peer reviewers. I will get an article in, and I've sort of had to rebuild the database of peer reviewers from scratch, and I have about 320 now, and that's not even enough because again, I'll get a very interesting little niche piece on something, and there's I don't have an expert in that list. So well,
let me just throw this out. So listeners, there's a good number of you out there. If you would like to be a peer reviewer in a specific area for Laura, then just look up ACE, Air and Space Operations Review, or Ether. They're at Air University. You can find them and reach out to Laura and say, hey, I will be a peer reviewer for you. That ways you can ensure that whatever she gets a quality review, and she is able to publish quality articles.
Yes.
So
and
do that,
civilian and military alike. I really try hard to have a good balance of civilian reviewers who are not connected to the military, just to kind of give that other perspective when we send those out. So in terms of topics, again, similar to for JIPA, we have, obviously, Adam, as you know, deterrence is a recurring topic for Ether, following in the footsteps of SSQ. And back when, just for general information for anyone who's interested in knowing this history, SSQ was started in 2007, 6 or 7, in response to the AU commander at the time felt that based on some things that were happening on the Hill, that they needed a renewed focus on strategic topics at that time, it was ASPJ. And if you look back at the history of the journals over the lifetime of the journal that is now ASOR, which is its sixth title, they did actually have periods of time where they did cover strategic issues, but there was a period of time there in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they really had gotten away from that. And so in response to some calls from Congress, they felt that it was important to start that. So that's how Strategic Studies Quarterly sort of got off the ground. And so that's in the strategic focus. And when we renamed the journals, rebranded the journals, we sort of envisioned them as two sides of the same coin. So you have Ether, which is the strategic view, and ASOR, which is the operational view for space power and air power. And so when you're thinking about topics, it's the same thing, a wide range of topics. We had this fantastic article on the effect of climate change out to 2099 on strategic lift. And the author was actually interviewed by Air and Space Forces magazine after she published in the journal this summer. So that was fantastic. We just released a special issue of Ether that features PME articles from space PME. So all space power. And we did another dedicated all space issue a year ago as well. In Air and Space Operations Review, we're looking at articles on AI now. That's very popular. Any tech that's operational related, either air or space power operations. Then we have resilience, the more softer issues. So we just had that special Ether issue in the fall on moral injury. Every article was on moral injury. And the feedback on that has been really amazing. Like, people are coming out of the woodwork, just very grateful that there's been some focus on that. So we try, and again, it's a broad range, but like Ernest said, if it's related to air power and space power, and if it's of meaning for an airman or a guardian. So it doesn't just have to be about air operations or satellite operations. Resilience is important to airmen. So if there's a research topic on suicide, for example, we're considering doing a special issue devoted to suicide. And again, an academic view. So it's different than, personal narratives and personal stories.
Yeah. And it's, I've always enjoyed over the, since from 2007 to the present, there have been a lot of discussion. It's sort of been one of the most relevant places if you want to read about nuclear modernization, deterrence writ large, deterrence against the Chinese, the Russians. You really can't find somebody who's written more about it, and particularly from an applied approach. It's really been kind of one of the main places to go. Now, I'm looking at the clock, and guess what, guys? It's that time when Bob the genie comes out, so I'm going to rub his magic lamp. Bob comes out, and now Bob grants 3 wishes to all of our guests solely about the topics of which we've been discussing. And so that means that you guys and I, maybe you can split the wishes, because I don't know how generous Bob actually is. I mean, he's okay, but he's not that generous. So, Ernest, I'll give you wish number 1. So if you could have any wish related to our topics, what would your wish be?
I think I wish for leadership to finally get it through their heads that what we do is relevant as what it is, and to give us the proper funding and support that we need to really thrive, so that we can stop worrying from year to year as to whether or not we're still going to be gainfully employed, and even more than that, whether we're going to be able to continue to do to provide the service that we feel is relevant and why we do what we do.
Yeah, that's always a good one. I mean, it's I remember my days in the Air Force, and every year you worried about cuts and where were they gonna come? So stability would be great. How about you, Laura? What would your wish number 2?
Well, Ernest took my first wish. So, so in addition to that, I just really would love for people to read more about us, read us. And if they're working on something that they find that they're passionate about, that they find interesting, that they take a chance and send it our way. You do have to go through peer review, but that's the way it works in academic journals. And so, I'd love to get the fresh ideas and new ideas and new perspectives on things. So, if you have a new idea, that's my wish.
Okay, so we have one wish left, and I'll leave it up to you guys to decide what that wish is going to be. So, betwixt the two of you, is there a third wish of, sort of any sort that you wish you could make or you wish were granted?
I'm going to give this one to Ernest.
Oh, okay. You're faster than me. Darn it. I guess I wish that we could write in a world that was a little bit more, or publish in a world that was a little bit more stable. As exciting as it is to be publishing constantly about conflict and potential conflict and great power competition and strategic competition, or whatever we're calling it for the day, it would just be nice, just to be able to have at least a 5 to 10 year stretch where we could just kind of focus on developing the world and what we can all do to make it a better place, especially this time of year, right, when we're getting to the holiday season, and we're New Year's coming up and whatnot. It's that timeless wish that we had an opportunity to just kind of all get along, and
That's a very Miss America answer, by the way.
Well, thank you.
World peace. So, thanks for joining us. Hopefully the listeners are always looking for that senior leader perspective, and they love to hear from lab directors and such. But I wanted to, sort of take it in a different direction, because we do have so many very senior folks who have a lot to say, but we want it captured. It needs to be captured for posterity. Their experiences, the things that they've seen work and not work. That's part of what I love about professional journals, is that it gives you a chance to capture lessons learned and to talk about what works and what doesn't in an empirically rigorous way. And so go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did some research when I was at Parameters, and I've done a little bit here since I've been here, but I discovered that if you look back, you'll see some very familiar names who are general officers now, who published in these journals when they were majors and lieutenant colonels. And it's with few exceptions, the people that are at the top now were the ones publishing when they were at that stage. And so look to the captains and the majors and the lieutenant colonels in our journals right now. They might be future leaders of the Air Force and Space Force.
One of the articles I've hated most over the last 15 years was one, Chas Saltzman wrote, and so that he was a part of. So, I mean, for me as a nuke guy, I can say that, articles have an impact, and that the guys and gals who write them tend to, like you said, make their way to the top. So of course you, the listeners, need to write as well, or peer review. You got to do one or the other. It's now a NucleCast commandment. So, but thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming on NucleCast. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
And thanks to you, the listeners, of course, for joining us on this episode. And we will see you next time. Now, I know everybody loves to come to, they listen to NucleCast because they want to hear, senior leader perspectives on topics. But it's really relevant because publishing, I tell you, it's a fundamental question. Do you want to be Napoleon, or do you want to be Karl Marx? And, Napoleon influenced the world in his time. And Karl Marx, he wrote 150 years ago, and he's still influential. His writings and his thinking have not gone away, and very well may not go away. And so I would just encourage, you, the listeners, to see how important this kind of professional writing is, and how much good it could possibly do, for the nuclear enterprise and the nuclear community, because it matters, it gets read, and it has a lasting impact. And that was the whole point of today's episode. So hopefully you enjoyed it.
This has been a production of the NWA Deterrence Center, a 501c3 that seeks to educate key decision makers, stakeholders, and the public to ensure a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent. Our executive producer is Kimberly Chamberlain, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Crumple. Help us grow our followers by sharing it, and follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast.